It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. The Kurds in northern Iraq voted for independent state in a referendum on Tuesday. Somewhere between 72 and 92% of the voters said yes to autonomy and independence. Kurdish President Masoud Barzani announced the results as follows.
Great people of Kurdistan, you did not allow anyone to break your will when you voted yes to independence and no to new Anfal, chemical attack and massacre. We entered a new stage, and this is a win for all of Kurdistan.
The results triggered an avalanche of responses from Baghdad, Iraq's central government, and nearly every state in the world opposed the Kurdish independence move, except for Israel. Turkey, Iran, and Iraq have already stated that they are imposing some forms of sanctions against the Kurds in order to turn back the referendum results. Joining us now to discuss the latest in all of this is Sabah Alnasseri. He's associate professor at York University in Toronto. Today joining us from Qatar, where he's traveling the region for research. Thank you so much.
Good to be with you, Sharmini.
Sabah, give us an overview of, first, the timing of this referendum, why now, and the measure itself, the results from Tuesday, and the implications this has on Kurdish independence.
All right. First of all, I would like to say, so that my comments won't be misunderstood, I am very sympathetic to the demands of the Kurdish people that include independence, having their own state. Yet I do think that the timing of the referendum is neither a coincidence nor something that is unproblematic. And for three reasons. The first reason, what I will term Trump mess. When Trump came to the region mid-May and tried to form a so-called Islamic alliance against Iran, few days after that, a crisis erupted in the Gulf region between Qatar on the one side, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Egypt on the other side. And on June 5th, these countries, boycotted Qatar and imposed sanctions and so on. On June 8th, 3 days after that, Barzani, the president of the KRG, the Kurdistan region in Iraq, announced on his Twitter, a la Trump, the date of the referendum, which is September 25th. This is the first thing. The second thing, the problem is, the major problem, I believe, is the question of legitimacy and the political crisis in Kurdistan itself. And the reason for that is that since 2019, there was no parliamentary election in Kurdistan, no presidential election in Kurdistan. In 2013, the Kurdish parliament at that time extended the term of Barzani for 2 years, August 2013 to 2015. And then in 2015 again, the Kurdish parliament, or actually the DKP, the Democratic Party of Kurdistan of Barzani, solicited the so-called consultancy council to extend the term Barzani for other 2 years. And this request was illegal because it didn't follow the standard procedure in the Kurdish parliament, according to which this request should have been signed by the Speaker of the Parliament, who was Yusuf Sadiq, one member of the Quran, or the Movement for Change in Kurdistan, the second largest bloc in the parliament. And de facto, actually, he was blocked from entering Erbil at that time by the Peshmerga. So there was a crisis. That means the extension of Barzani's presidential term for 2 years, from 2015 to 2017, is illegal. That's why many opposing Kurds to the referendum argue that this whole process is undemocratic because there was no parliament, and the parliament did not back up this referendum. It was unilaterally decided by Barzani. And the reason for that, I believe, because otherwise there was no referendum, presidential and parliamentary election would have taken place. And I'm sure that Barzani would have lost the election, the presidential election. In other words, against the will and the objection of the Kurdish parties in Kurdistan, like the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, like the Quran Movement for Change, like the Islamic groups who were for the independence, were for the referendum, but not now. They was arguing we can wait for a year or two or even 10. The timing is not appropriate. And they believe, and rightly so, that Barzani is trying to hijack the Kurdish question to stay in power, to displace the question for presidential and parliamentary election. The third moment, I believe, why the timing is so problematic is that there are so-called disputed areas between Kurdistan and the central government Baghdad. And these areas were occupied by the Peshmerga in the last 3 years during the fight against ISIS. So that means Kurdistan extended its territory by almost 40% beyond the border of Kurdistan. Now, holding the referendum in these areas, Barzani is trying to put legitimate claim to this territory to be part of the Kurdish jurisdiction in a future Kurdish state. And you can see this very clearly in the question of the referendum. The question was not only if you agree to the independence of Kurdistan, but also, and it's very problematic, he termed the disputed area as Kurdistanis areas, that also Kurdistanis area be part of the Kurdish state. I think that was a provocation to the central government in Iraq and to the ethnic mix of these territories in Diyala and Nineveh, Mosul part of it, and Salah ad-Din, and so on. So there are three moments, internal moments. I think Barzani thought the Iraqi government is busy fighting ISIS, especially now in Hawija and other cities and villages in Iraq. You know, the war is not done yet. And in this sense, trying to have the referendum at this time, thinking that he could secure the extension of the Kurdish territory beyond its border and expand the space of the Kurdish state. But he underestimated the internal, regional, and international reaction to the referendum.
So then, Sabah, given all of these issues that you're raising with the timing of the referendum, yet 92%, according to The Guardian, came out and voted in favor of independence. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure the 92% means the voters within Kurdistan itself. That means the province of Duhok, Suleymaniye, Halabja, and Erbil, or it includes the so-called disputed territory, which are not exclusively Kurds. So I'm not quite sure about that. The number I had is within Kurdistan itself. I think it was something like 78%, between 72 and 78%. But regardless, I believe the absolute majority of the Kurds voted in this referendum. But the problem is, as I said, we are talking only about the voters, not the total number of the population in Kurdistan. Because as far as I know, the Arab, the Turkmen, and other minorities did not vote in this referendum. And an interesting case is the province of Halabja, because Barzani was using in his speech the reason for the referendum on independence is the chemical attack on Halabja in 1988 by at that time the Ba'athis under Saddam Hussein, which is weird because actually, you know, since 2003, the Kurds are allied of the Shiite parties in Baghdad, and they designed the Iraqi constitution with the Shiite political parties, and they have their autonomy since 1991. So to go back to the 80s to justify the referendum, it's a bit overstretched. But in any case, in Halabja, for instance, and that's an interesting case where this chemical genocidal attack of the Ba'athist happened that time, Halabja actually, in its majority, 54%, or 53 to 54%, voted against the separation of Kurdistan from Iraq. So, and the other problem is that actually the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan in Sulaymaniyah and the Quran movement and the Jamaat al-Islamiyah, the Islamic group, were against the referendum. But they had to go with Barzani because they feared some political marginalization after the referendum. So they had to say yes. So that's why I would be very cautious to read too much into these numbers.
Sabah, let's turn to Baghdad. What is Baghdad's reaction to the referendum? And I imagine they're not very happy with this.
Yeah, I mean, the Iraqi parliament, the Iraqi government, and the Supreme Court, the Constitutional Court, they all rejected the referendum because it's unconstitutional. And they tried to actually engage in negotiation with Kurdistan, especially with Barzani, to postpone the referendum, especially now that Iraq is in a war with Daesh, with ISIS. But all these talks failed, and Barzani insisted on having the referendum on September 25th. So the Iraqi government, on the eve of the referendum, argued, and in the Iraqi parliament too, that if Barzani goes ahead with the referendum and act unconstitutionally, there will be no negotiation after the referendum on question regarding, let's say, independence, etc. And that all the territories in Kurdistan and northern of Iraq will be under the jurisdiction of the central government, of the federal government, and that the federal government will impose sanctions, air, land, and other sanctions on Kurdistan. And it will also coordinate with Iran and Turkey and Syria to close the border to Kurdistan. And the Iraqi government asked the Kurdish government to give them ultimatum until Friday to actually deliver the land borders of Kurdistan and the airport and so on to the federal government. That means there's an escalation here in the central/Kurdistan government regarding the post-referendum moment. At the same time, Iran and Turkey also, but also Syria, they opposed the referendum. They consider it unconstitutional and destabilizing not only in Iraq, but also to the whole region.
Sabah, let's take up the regional reaction to all of this in our next segment.
Happy to join you again.
And thank you for joining us here on the Real News Network.